Your money is connected to a bank that sits at the center of global finance, quiet, disciplined, and almost invisible. Its decisions ripple through interest rates, liquidity, and the stability of entire nations. The name of this bank is Bank for International Settlements. But how did they gain such control? Before we get into how they gained so much control, did you know BIS shape interest rates, liquidity flows, and global financial stability? It operates above national politics, yet its decisions influence your savings, your debt, and your economic future. This means they are the hidden force behind central banks. The rise. How they became the hidden force that gained such level of control begins in 1929, when the global financial system was collapsing under the weight of war debts, currency instability, and political distrust. Germany still owed 121 billion gold marks in reparations under the Treaty of Versailles, a burden that was destabilizing Europe's banking system. To prevent a complete economic breakdown, a committee led by Owen D. Young, an American industrialist and founder of RCA, drafted the Young Plan, a restructuring of Germany's payments. But the plan required a neutral institution to manage the transfers, oversee settlements, and coordinate central banks. That institution became the Bank for International Settlements, formally established at the 1930 Hague Conference, where delegates from Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland signed the founding convention. From the beginning, the BIS was engineered to operate above politics. Its first president, Gates W. Magera, formerly of Chase National Bank and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, was chosen for his credibility in international finance. The first general manager, Leon Fraser, a lawyer and diplomat, was selected for his ability to navigate political tensions. The BIS headquarters was placed in Basel, Switzerland, not for convenience, but for strategic neutrality. Switzerland offered legal immunities, extraterritorial status, and stable currency conditions essential for an institution meant to coordinate central banks that often distrusted one another. The early BIS board included some of the most influential monetary figures of the era: Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England; Wael Schacht, president of the Reichsbank; and Charles Rist, vice-governor of the Banque de France. These were not bureaucrats. They were the architects of national monetary policy, men who controlled interest rates, currency stability, and the flow of capital. Their presence signaled that the BIS was not a technical agency. It was a strategic command center for global finance. During the 1930s, as the Great Depression deepened, the BIS became the only place where central bankers could coordinate responses to collapsing currencies and failing banks. When Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1931, when the United States devalued the dollar in 1933, and when France struggled to defend the franc, the BIS facilitated emergency consultations and liquidity support. These meetings were private, discreet, and shielded from political interference. This secrecy was not accidental. It was the operating model. Central banks needed a space where they could act without triggering market panic or political backlash. BIS's influence expanded further during the monetary chaos of the 1930s. It provided short-term credit to central banks, stabilized exchange rates, and became the trusted intermediary for gold transfers. Even as political tensions escalated in Europe, BIS maintained communication channels that governments themselves could not. This continuity, this ability to function when nations fractured, cemented its role as the backbone of international monetary cooperation. After the Second World War, BIS adapted again. Despite calls at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference to dissolve it, the institution survived because central banks insisted it was indispensable. Europe needed reconstruction, currencies needed stabilization, and the new global monetary order required coordination. The BIS became the hub for implementing capital controls, managing exchange rate adjustments, and monitoring systemic risks. It evolved from a reparations agent into the quiet architect of modern central banking. This is the rise of BIS, a bank created to solve one crisis, strengthened by every crisis that followed, and now embedded so deeply in global finance that its decisions shape your savings, your debt, and the economic environment you navigate every day. So, they clearly have had a number of challenges along the way. What challenges do you think BIS went through? The challenges. Well, there are at least 7 major challenges they experienced. Each one threatened its survival, its legitimacy, or its influence. And every time the institution was pushed to the edge, it emerged with even greater authority over the financial system you rely on. The first major challenge came almost immediately. The Young Plan collapsed in 1931 when Germany suspended reparation payments, leaving the BIS without its founding purpose. The institution had to reinvent itself within 2 years of being created, shifting from a reparations agent to a coordination hub for central banks navigating the Great Depression. This pivot forced the BIS to prove it could add value even when its original mandate evaporated. The second challenge was the currency warfare of the 1930s. Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1931, the United States devalued the dollar in 1933, and France fought desperately to defend the franc. Nations were no longer cooperating. They were competing. BIS had to convince central banks that coordination was still possible in a world where economic nationalism was becoming the default strategy. The third challenge emerged from the political tensions leading into the Second World War. BIS found itself operating between governments preparing for conflict while still needing financial stability. Central bankers continued meeting in Basel even as their nations drifted toward war, creating scrutiny and accusations of political entanglement. Yet BIS survived because it provided something no government could: a neutral space where monetary officials could communicate without triggering diplomatic crises. The fourth challenge was the wartime controversy itself. BIS faced allegations of facilitating gold transfers linked to occupied territories, and its board included officials from both Allied and Axis nations. By 1944, the controversy reached the Bretton Woods Conference, where delegates voted to dissolve BIS entirely. But central banks, especially in Europe, refused to let it disappear, arguing that post-war reconstruction would be impossible without it. The fifth challenge came when the Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971. With the end of dollar-gold convertibility, the world lost its monetary anchor. Exchange rates floated, inflation surged, and global markets became volatile. BIS had to redefine its role again, shifting from fixed-rate coordination to stabilizing a world of unpredictable capital flows. The sixth challenge was the wave of global banking crises from the 1980s to 2008. Latin America, Japan, Europe, and the global financial crisis exposed systemic weaknesses. BIS responded by creating the Basel Accords, transforming itself into the global regulator of banking capital and risk. The seventh challenge is the modern era: shadow banking, crypto assets, CBDCs, geopolitical fragmentation, and inflation volatility. These forces are reshaping the financial system you depend on, and BIS is positioning itself at the center of the next monetary architecture. So you can only imagine that these challenges managed to help BIS with their major turning points. The turning points. Its influence on global finance grew through a series of turning points, moments when the world's monetary system was unstable, governments were divided, and central banks needed an institution capable of acting when no one else could. These turning points transformed BIS from a technical body into the strategic center of global monetary coordination, shaping the financial conditions that influence your savings, your debt, and the economic environment you move through every day. Therefore, the first major turning point came after the collapse of the Young Plan. With reparations suspended, BIS could have become irrelevant. Instead, it pivoted into a coordination hub during the Great Depression. Central banks needed a neutral space to discuss collapsing currencies, failing banks, and emergency liquidity. BIS filled that vacuum, proving it could adapt faster than governments trapped in political paralysis. The second major turning point emerged from the currency wars of the 1930s. As nations abandoned the gold standard and devalued their currencies to gain trade advantages, BIS became the only institution capable of mediating between competing monetary blocs. These private meetings in Basel established a pattern that still defines BIS today: discrete cooperation during periods of economic nationalism. The third major turning point came during the Second World War. Despite political pressure, accusations of entanglement, and the vote at Bretton Woods to dissolve it, BIS survived because central banks insisted it was essential for post-war reconstruction. This moment cemented a critical truth. Governments could debate about BIS, but central banks depended on it. The fourth major turning point arrived with the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. When the dollar-gold link was severed, the world entered an era of floating exchange rates, inflation shocks, and volatile capital flows. BIS stepped into the leadership vacuum, coordinating central bank responses and helping stabilize a system that no longer had a fixed anchor. The fifth major turning point came with the global banking crises of the late 20th century. From Latin America to Japan to Europe, financial systems were cracking under debt, speculation, and weak regulation. BIS responded by creating the Basel Accords, Basel I, Basel II, and eventually Basel III, establishing global standards for capital, liquidity, and systemic risk. The final major turning point is unfolding now. Shadow banking, crypto assets, CBDCs, and geopolitical fragmentation are reshaping global finance. And once again, central banks are turning to BIS to design the next monetary framework, one that will influence your financial stability for decades to come. Therefore, it is clear that they needed to be extremely strategic. What strategic steps do you think BIS done, and what strategies would you have put in place? The strategies. As you are fully aware, BIS did not become the center of global finance by accident, nor was it overnight. Its influence grew because they applied a set of long-term strategies designed to outlast political cycles, economic shocks, and geopolitical rivalries. These strategies allowed BIS to operate above governments, beyond elections, and outside the public spotlight, while shaping the financial conditions that determine your cost of living, your access to credit, and the stability of the economy you depend on every day. The first major strategy was institutional neutrality. BIS positioned itself as a politically untouchable space where central banks could coordinate without interference. By securing legal immunities, extraterritorial status, and diplomatic protections, BIS ensured that no government could dictate its agenda. This neutrality became a strategic asset, allowing the institution to operate even when nations were in conflict. The second important strategy was information dominance. BIS built the world's most comprehensive database of cross-border capital flows, banking exposures, and systemic vulnerabilities. Central banks relied on this intelligence to make decisions, giving BIS leverage that no political institution could match. Information became the currency of influence, and BIS controlled the supply. The third crucial strategy was crisis leadership. Every major financial shock, from the Great Depression to the 1970s inflation spiral to the 2008 global financial crisis, created a vacuum that BIS stepped into. By coordinating emergency liquidity, stabilizing markets, and shaping policy responses, BIS positioned itself as the institution that central banks turned to when the system was at risk. Crises became opportunities to expand authority. The fourth pivotal strategy was regulatory architecture. Through the Basel Accords, BIS established global standards for capital, liquidity, and risk management. These rules were adopted by national regulators, effectively giving BIS indirect control over the structure of global banking. By defining the rules, BIS shaped the behavior of every major financial institution in the world. The fifth and absolutely necessary strategy was future-proofing. As digital money, crypto assets, and CBDCs emerged, BIS moved early to coordinate research, design frameworks, and set interoperability standards. By shaping the next generation of monetary infrastructure, BIS ensured it would remain central to global finance for decades to come. These strategies were not reactive. They were deliberate. They allowed BIS to evolve from a reparations agent into the quiet architect of the modern financial system, influencing the stability of your savings, the resilience of your bank, and the economic environment you navigate every day. But what have you learned so far that you can implement in your own life and business journey? Well, put it this way. You have learned so far that the story of BIS is not just a financial one. What you are learning is that these lessons apply directly to how you build your business, manage your money, and navigate the world around you. So the first lesson is that real power is built quietly. BIS focused on relationships, information, and positioning. In your own journey, The most powerful moves you will ever make are in accordance with faith and trust. Is moving in silence. Let your work speak for you. The second lesson is that neutrality is a strategic weapon. BIS gained influence by being the one place everyone could trust, even when they didn't trust each other. In your life, neutrality means becoming the person who can operate across groups, industries, and opportunities. When you are not tied to one camp, you become valuable to all of them. This can be your strength. Remaining partial to other individuals and other organizations gives you more leverage, but it's how you use that leverage without destroying your relationships. This brings us to the third lesson, is that information is the ultimate currency. The BIS shaped global finance because it understood more than anyone else. The same applies to you. The more you understand markets, people, incentives, and timing, the more control you gain over your financial future. Knowledge compounds faster than money. The fourth very important lesson is that crises create openings. Every major leap in BIS influence came during instability. Most people retreat when conditions become uncertain. But those who stay calm, analyze clearly, and act decisively position themselves for disproportionate gains. Your ability to make rational decisions under pressure will determine the trajectory of your wealth and your career. So do not panic. The fifth lesson is the power of your identity, which drives ambition. BIS never saw itself as a bank. It saw itself as the architect of global stability. That identity shaped its actions. In your own life, the identity you choose, leader, creator, and strategist will dictate the opportunities you pursue and the standards you hold yourself to. Think about how you see yourself and your business. With that said, these lessons are not that hard to learn. They actually shape the way you build your business, manage your money, and navigate the economic environment you rely on every day. So, how will you apply these fundamental lessons? Before you make your decision on what lessons you will apply, let's go over a brief recap of BIS journey. I am sure you can tell how emotional it has been, especially as it has sustained for this long. When you step back and look at the entire journey of the BIS, you realize this is not just a story about institutions or economics. It is also a story about resilience, reinvention, and the quiet pursuit of power. It is a reminder that the world you live in, your savings, your debt, and your opportunities is shaped not by being loud and erratic, but by the decisions made in silence. And that silence is where BIS built its influence. There is something almost quite impressive about how it all unfolded. An institution was created for a purpose that collapsed within 2 years, yet it refused to disappear. Instead of fading, it adapted. Instead of breaking under pressure, it found new relevance. Their survival is not about circumstances. It is about identity. The BIS decided what it was long before the world recognized it. This is something you will come to realize the more time you'll have establishing your business. Pressure either bursts pipes or makes diamonds. This is not just a saying. This is a lifestyle. So mind how you mind your actions and thoughts. Then came the currency wars, the political tensions, the accusations, the vote to dissolve it. Any other institution would have fractured, but BIS did the opposite. It became the one place where rivals still met, even when their governments were preparing for conflict. Neutrality is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is the ability to stand firm when everyone else is choosing sides. And then the turning points. The collapse of Bretton Woods. The inflation storms. The global banking crises. Each moment could have been the end. Instead, each moment became a step upward. Crises do not define you. Your response does. BIS grew because it acted when others hesitated. BIS never chased applause. It never sought headlines. It never needed validation. Its power came from consistency, discipline, and long-term vision. And that is the lesson for you. Your journey, your business, your money, and your ambition will be shaped not by what people see, but by what you build quietly, patiently, and relentlessly. This is why it remains playing chess behind the scenes. You don't see them, you don't hear them, but you definitely feel them in your life and business. So, there is a principle to all of this. Do you know what this is? The principle. Well, the principle is this. Power is not defined by visibility, but by the ability to shape the conditions everyone else must operate within. The institutions that influence your financial life the most are rarely the ones that dominate headlines or political debates. They are the ones that sit above the noise, above the election cycle, above the public narrative entirely. They operate in silence because silence is the only environment where long-term stability can be engineered. And BIS is the clearest demonstration of that principle anywhere in the modern financial system. Its influence does not depend on public recognition or public legitimacy. It comes from the fact that every major central bank relies on it, relying on its data, its frameworks, its crisis playbooks, and its ability to coordinate decisions across borders when the stakes are highest. When markets panic, BIS becomes the room where clarity is created. When governments disagree, BIS becomes the neutral ground where decisions are shaped. When the world is confused, BIS becomes the institution that still thinks in decades instead of days. And this is how planning is done with action. This is architecture. That is structural power, built slowly and quietly over generations. And this is why BIS can be three things at once. The most powerful bank you've never heard of, the secret institution that quietly shapes global finance, and the place where the world's central banks align their decisions without ever appearing to coordinate in public. These identities are not contradictions. They are the natural outcome of a system built on discretion, trust, and long-term incentives. BIS does not need to command central banks. It simply builds the environment they all have to operate in. And once you shape the environment, you do not need to control anything else. Everyone adjusts to you automatically, because the system itself has been designed around your presence. So when you look at BIS, do not see a building in Basel or a committee of economists. See the principle. Real power belongs to the institutions that design the system, not the ones that perform inside it. The ones that write the rules before anyone else even sees them. The ones that coordinate quietly while the rest of the world argues loudly. The ones that operate above visibility, above politics, and above the public conversation. Because once you understand that, you do not just understand BIS. You now understand how global finance actually works and who truly shapes it. So, it's no longer a secret of who truly owns and runs global finance. And you also understand how powerful BIS is and why central banks, even in the country you are in, needs them, and you need them too.